format. Do you know that? Hear about that? Woo! Okay.
That'd be a really fun break. But also have a bunch of stuff in chemistry too.
Yeah.
So I think I've got
So it's
20 total. So yeah.
Yeah. You're gonna be busy. All right. So normal distribution curves
And I've got a quiz.
are exactly that. It is a curve. Okay. Looks like a bell. Sometimes they call it a bell-shaped curve. The hardest part about these problems is remembering the percentages, aka memorizing. So if you can't memorize the percentages, the problem's impossible. Okay. So what we're going to be looking at,
Is there a song?
Nope.
Aww.
You can always create one if you want one. So for this first example in your calculators, I want you to tell me the mean and the standard deviation. So if our mean is going to be 137.92 and our standard deviation is 120.23. So from what we learned yesterday, what does that standard deviation tell you about our data?
It's not an accurate representation.
Right, it's not very accurate, okay? 120 is like a huge number in terms of stats, okay? If you're, and especially in terms of your average being 137, all right? So with that being said, especially when we start looking at the normal distribution curve, we're gonna be adding and subtracting our standard deviation. But if you notice, if you start with your average, which is 137.92 or whatever, and you subtract 120, then you subtract 120 again, you're already in the negative. Can't really have a negative tornado, okay? I don't know what that would be called. Okay, so again, this is not a good representation of the data, but what I'm trying to show you here is that for the normal distribution curve, we just need to be able to know how to find the mean and the standard deviation. More times than not, they give it to you. Okay, so like I said, the normal distribution curve, you're not going to write this one down. It's a bell-shaped curve. Your average is going to be in the middle here. So if you notice, just by the looks of it, majority of your data is in the middle. Okay, so that's why when you ask your teacher, can you curve a test, it might not help you out much. Okay, these would be your A's on the far end, your F's on this end here, but they would want majority. That's why when you hear sometimes teachers say our average was a 75, that's awesome. Or like they say like, oh, our average was a C, that's awesome. Because majority of the students are lying within that middle part there. If you notice, we have 3 marks going to the left, and we have 3 marks going to the right, okay? And we're going to talk about what those marks are. So like I said, we talked about this just a second ago. The smaller the standard deviation. Here's a visual representation for you. Notice how that's a lot of our data all in one little area. That's a little bit better than if it's all spread out like here. Okay. So here's the important part. This guy right here. You have what's called the empirical rule. So within your data, one standard deviation away from your mean needs to be 68% of your data. Okay? 68% of everything needs to be right there in that middle. Then from there, 95% fits in. And then 99.7, and of course the whole curve is 100. So let's take this information here and create this, all right? And I'm gonna do it, sometimes it's easier if I do it by hand with y'all. Okay, so let's start off with our bell curve. We have our mean. We have 3 standard deviations to the left and 3 standard deviations to the right. Beautiful curve. Okay. So the empirical rule tells us that within the first standard deviation, it said that 68% of my data needs to be in between the first standard deviation from the mean. Okay? So if it's 68% in that whole group, but I have 2 groups in there, what percentage goes in each one? 34%.
Math.
Okay. So the next part of the empirical rule tells us that 95% of my data needs to fit inside 2 standard deviations from the mean. So if the whole group right there is 95 and part of it's 68, we would simply just subtract the 95 and the 68 and then divide it by 2. What's our percentage that goes there?
13.5.
13.5.
Math.
Okay, and the next part says we have 99.7% of our data in between 3 standard deviations of the mean. So I'm going to take 99.7, subtract my 95, divide it by 2. What do I get?
2.35.
2.35.
Yeah.
And if my entire bell curve is 100%, I would just take 100 minus 99.7 divided by 2. And this little area here is the 0.15. Okay. So you can approach this 2 different ways. You can memorize those 3 percentages, 68, 95, 99.7. Or you can memorize the other percentages. My biggest suggestion for these is taking every single problem we do and putting those percentages in every single time. The more you write them, the more you're not going to forget them, I promise. Okay? Every year I have to remind myself the numbers, but after doing 1 or 2 problems, it's right back in there. Okay, so the more you put them in every single problem, the more you're not going to forget them. Okay. So the hardest part, like I said, is remembering this. Okay. From there, it's super simple. And what I mean by that is when you set up your normal distribution curve, they'll give you an average, a mean, then they'll tell you your standard deviation. So all you'll do, you'll take your mean, you'll add a standard deviation, add it, subtract it, subtract it, subtract it. Okay. Then they'll ask you questions like, what's the probability or what's the percentage that you make a 95 or higher on your test? So then you'd go to wherever 95 is located, meaning like they'll be written down here, and you'll just tell me the percentage. So once it's set up, it's super simple. It's kind of like those questions on like the ACT and stuff like that, where it's like you're literally just reading a graph after that point. That's what happens. You're literally just going to be reading this. Yeah.
If it says like a 95 or higher and the 95 is like in the 2.35 area, is it just the 2.35 or is that plus the other percentages?
It'd be 2.5%. You would add the two together. All right, so let's look at an example. Go ahead and set up just your normal distribution curve. Okay, so that's all we know how to set up so far. Okay, so this is what I was saying, how simple it is with the next part. They're telling you that the average or the mean is 82. So that goes right here in the middle. Okay, then the standard deviation, remember that's how much we're deviating from the mean, is just a 5%. So I'm going to add 5 and subtract 5. So 87, 92, 97, then I'm going to subtract 77, 72, and 67. So I add my standard deviation 3 times to the right, and I subtract my standard deviation 3 times to the left. I think so if I showed y'all this before, right here. Whoops. Y'all probably would have started twitching a little bit with all those math symbols. Okay. But that is exactly what we're doing here. Let me move this. So it's saying here's your average, add a standard deviation, add 2 standard deviations, add 3 standard deviations. So much easier to just say keep adding 5 and keep subtracting 5. Okay. So now they ask us the question, what is the probability that John will get between an 82 and an 87% on his next test? So all I would do, once it's set up, and y'all, let me tell you this. If the numbers that are up here in the problem aren't down here on the line, you added wrong, okay? They don't really deviate from those problems, okay? They don't really go away from that. So if you added incorrectly, it's going to show up on this bottom line here, okay? So between 82 and 87, what's the probability? 34%, okay? So hardest part, remembering the percentages and making sure you can add and subtract. I mean, hardest part. From there, I can ask you a ton of questions. I can say, what's the probability that they scored above a 92? I would just add 2.35 and 1.5 to get 2.5%, okay? I could say, what's the probability between 77 and a 97? I would just take all of these percentages and I would add them up, okay? Any questions so far? Okay, let's do another one. Be careful with what they are asking you. Sometimes they want the probability and the percentage. Sometimes they want to know about the product.
Oh, mayonnaise.
So unless the problem says construct or draw or whatever a normal distribution curve, if it says that as a part of the question, then you need to do all of it, okay? But if they don't ask you to, like, as a part of the question to actually draw one out, or that it looks like it's going to be a part of what's graded, if I'm looking at this problem and I know that I'm only interested in 45 or more, I'm probably not even going to waste my time doing the left-hand side, okay? Unless in the question it says construct or show and then answer this question kind of thing, okay? So with that being said, I can look at it and say greater than 45 is going to get me a 2.5%, which means how many bottles were they interested in? 25. So like I said, make sure you're paying attention to what they are asking you. So how many times? 25 times or 25 bottles or whatever, instead of just a percentage.
A whole nother ounce of mayonnaise. What's the
I don't know. That would be one of those factories I could not working.
Superfoods Food Factory.
No, like a
Sure.
mayonnaise factory. Just
Just,
oh, that kind of just sent like chills up my spine.
mayonnaise.
That or like a chicken farm. Ugh.
Chicken farm.
Ugh.
Dude,
Like-
Have you
what do
ever
mean by
driven
chicken
by one of
Do you
those?
mean like a chicken farm where there are chickens, or a chicken farm where they're growing?
producing.
Like where they're dying.
Oh, okay.
So like a
I
slaughter.
thought you meant like where they're growing. As soon as they figure out how to grow chickens, I'm gonna jump on that. They're like, when they figure out how to grow animals, like,
To
Plant
like
the seed, right?
from the ground?
Plant a negative ground.
yeah. As soon as they figure out how to do that, I'm gonna jump right on
You're
it.
sounding like that one dude in Wally who wants to make the pizza.
All right, try this one. I do photography on this side, and I was taking some pictures of a family last night, and the little boy thought pizzas were going to come out of my camera.
What? Why?
He was
Was
wanting
he
to know.
schizophrenic?
He was like, "Where does the pizza?" He's like, "Where does the pizza come out of your camera?" And I'm like, "What?" His mom looked at me, and she's like, "I don't know. He thinks because it's a bigger camera that pizzas should be able to come out of it."
What?
Oh, I thought he was talking about like the Polaroid thing where it's like it prints up a picture.
Maybe that's where his mind went. I don't know.
It's just a waste of film, honestly.
he's 3. I mean, you remember being 3.
I bet he
right?
saw it in like a cartoon or something. Like he saw like a character.
Yeah, like in a cartoon, I'm sure, and it was like a pizza came out and it's the camera. I was like, whatever gets you to smile at my camera, I'll get all the
Yeah, it's
pizzas
like
coming
that
out.
tall, and they put it in long ways. Yeah.
All right, Mr. Dahlberg's breakout class, I guess you can call him. What's the name?
Mark.
Marky Mark?
I don't think he would be as popular
He's gonna
if his
ruin
name is
it.
Mark Dahlberg instead of Mark Wahlberg.
Oh my lord.
Marky Mark?
Yeah, but then,
And the Funky Bunch.
but if
Good
there's
old
Mark,
Marky.
if there's Mark Dahlberg, that means there's Donnie Dahlberg.
Yeah.
Donnie Dahlberg, dude.
Enter the marker person.
Oh.
I don't know.
So, your red flag for any time this comes across a test, of course, is going to be normally distributed. If you ever see that in a question, okay, remember that feeling of how easy these are, if you do feel that way. That I would hate for you to get on an actual state test or anything like that, and then you look at this and say, I don't even know where to begin because it's out of a chapter and just a word problem. But again, that normally distributed should be your red flag. Okay, so if I'm looking at 71 as my mean and I'm adding 7. Again, I want to make sure I am putting these percentages in here, not because I necessarily need them every single time, but that it helps me memorize them each time. Okay. So now I'm only interested in the percentage or the probability that a student in his class will get between an 85 and a 92 is what percent?
2.35.
2.35%. Okay.
Yeah. Good luck on the test.
So not very high, huh?
Mr. Dahlberg needs to teach better.
Yeah, come on, Mr. Dahlberg.
You're right. It's always the teacher's fault.
Yeah. I mean, it is pretty.
I mean, at least you admit it.
I mean, math is so easy, man.
Math is so easy.
Sometimes the masks are a good thing for me to be able to have a mask. Boy. Okay.
You can't yell either
Why not?
because young gets it too.
It's rude. You don't
Yeah,
want to be rude.
okay. That wasn't the path I was taking, but okay.
Oh, me.
Just like an alternate route.
Okay. Try this one.
Dude, I'm 15.4 years.
Matthew, something got your attention? Remember, this one's asking about students, not the percentage.
What's that on the board? 7 a.m. boys, girls, what's that?
They took a bet.
What?
They took a bet on what this is. We'll do it in here. There's not anyone in here, but
Should I be afraid?
Yes.
I'm not
they took a
gambler.
bet on what I'm having.
Oh! I was so confused. I thought.
I'm
I
not
pointed to
gambling.
my
I-
stomach. I said this.
Yeah, I didn't know.
I find out tomorrow morning.
I hope it's a boy so you can name a DJ.
Send it in the remind.
No, I can't.
Why not?
Because I gotta wait to tell all my friends.
Well, then
Are we not your friends?
Yeah.
No, y'all are my students.
Make our
Friends
line
too?
for all your friends and us for baby updates.
Baby, that's so weird.
It's not weird. It's only weird if you.
I'm doing that. I'm doing that whenever I'm getting ready to have a baby. I'm sending updates to everybody. Yeah.
I mean, yes, there will be group chats involved with my friends
Can I be in it?
and
Are we
family.
not your friends?
No, you're my student.
I'm a little hurt. I don't understand why we can't be your students and your friends.
Exactly. You are my students.
And your friend. I consider you a friend, Miss Jones.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The feelings apparently aren't.
Yeah, they aren't mutual. It's
I can like y'all.
Unrequited friendship.
That doesn't
That's
mean
like
you're
the-
necessarily
that's
my
like the
friend.
biggest-
Mr. Sides does the same thing. It's okay. I'm used to the abuse.
Abuse?
Yeah.
Oh boy.
He has emotional trauma from his teachers not wanting to be his friend.
Bless you.
Was that your last name?
Perhaps it wasn't.
What are you mumbling about? Agreed.
There is nothing.
All right, so again, I can keep going, filling this out if I want to. I also know that if this is my average here, I know that from here on out is how much of my data,
50%.
okay? So if I already have 50% of my data here, and then I'm including an additional 34, what is the percentage first? 84%. But they weren't interested in 84%. They were interested in how many students there were. So how many students rounded to the nearest student?
Sorry, I'm done. I forgot.
286 kids.
Huh?
You do not know how to calculate the percent.
Oh.
So all you're typing in is 340 times 0.84. I want 84% of 340. Okay, so just be on the lookout for what they're actually asking you. If they're asking you for the probability or percentage, give them that. If they're asking you for the product or the person or anything of that nature, make sure you give them that. Okay? Any questions?
So is that a no on the group chat?
It's a no on the group chat.
For right now.
Can we make a separate one? Can we make
I feel like y'all already have
Will
one.
you let me and Jenna babysit your child in the future? I'm actually good with kids. Legitimately.
I'm good with fixing.
Sometimes I might regret saying, are there any other questions?
So, I'm good.